I just turned
All
it
right,
on. Where you see
gotcha.
it now?
I see it. All right, whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Richard Willis, and I've worked with NCAT in some capacities since around 2006. But recently, I've been I guess rehired might be the best way to put it, by the Consortium of Accelerated Pavement Testers to do some work for them, updating what I had previously done when I was in part of grad school. And today, for the next few minutes, I just want to take a little bit of time to update y'all on what CAPT is and what it's planning on doing over the next few months. If you have any questions during this, feel free to just ask me, and I'll be happy to do the best I can to try to answer that for you. Just kind of what we're going to be looking at is a little bit about the members of CAPT and its specific objectives. We'll look at the emphasis areas of the group, and then finally we'll end with a little bit about new CAPT work that's going to be taking place. CAPT is actually a group of DOTs that have come together as part of a pooled fund to really focus on accelerated pavement testing. Not all of the organizations involved actually have APT facilities in their state, but the current members of the group are California, Indiana, Kansas, and Kansas is kind of the lead organization right now for CAPT. Minnesota, Ohio DOT, Texas DOT, New York State, and Alabama. In the past, there have been other members of the group as well, such as Louisiana and Florida and Illinois have all been involved. But these are the current members and what people are calling CAP2, PT2, or the second cycle of this pooled fund. If you look on the TRP website or the pooled fund website, the specific objective that it sets out for CAPT says that its objective is really to develop technical deliverables unique for APT facilities and really accelerate this technology transfer among owners. Because many facilities have been acting very independent of each other, doing things, having kind of their own methodologies for achieving all their own goals. And if we could kind of start speaking a common language, our results may become more applicable to the different APT facilities and across state lines. So to help with this, a group of really emphasis areas were developed. And these emphasis areas were presented at the 3rd International Conference on Accelerated Pavement Testing in a paper called The Objectives and Outcomes from a United States Consortium of Accelerated Pavement Testers. And Nelson Gibson, Ben Worrell, and myself were involved on this paper. And if we look at the first emphasis area for the US CAPT, it was really to look at facility and equipment advances that have been taking place over the past few years. The specific emphasis or the goal of this emphasis area was really to update the APT users on advances in instrumentation. And ideas were thrown around as possibly doing an instrumentation rodeo where APT facilities and vendors of instrumentation could come together at a common ground, look at these different sensors, what they could do, look at pros and cons, and really see what was out there so they could gather the data that they needed in the most efficient way. Emphasis area 3 was on the construction site practices and procedures. And this was really to have people figure out a way to minimize construction error at their APT facilities so they could gather data that wouldn't be discounted because of construction issues. Part of this work was completed and presented actually at the 3rd International Conference on Accelerated Testing. It was written up in a paper that you can find on that website called A Synthesis of Construction Practices for Accelerated Loading Facilities in the United States that was written by myself and Buzz Powell. And so some work was actually completed in this emphasis area. The fourth area was on the gaps and needs in APT instrumentation, and there was a strong focus on really instrumentation needs. As part of this emphasis area, an instrumentation synthesis of United States APT facilities was completed and written into synthesis form in the synthesis of practical and appropriate instrumentation for use in APT facilities. And it was also presented at the Third International Conference of Accelerated Pavement Testing. But other questions also surrounded Area 4. Specifically, how do I install instrumentation so that it's going to survive, so that I'm not going to affect maybe the pavement properties? Or how am I going to affect it so that I actually get the results that I want, or I'm reading the correct responses? Other questions that surrounded Area 4 were instrumentation repeatability. If I were to put a strain gauge out in the field, what's kind of my plus or minus range in terms of microstrains that I can expect to have, or what's my confidence interval? And while it wasn't specifically a part of CAPT's work, Dr. David Tim and I worked with the test track to really characterize the repeatability of strain gauges between gauges and just in one gauge itself on the 2006 and 2009 cycles of the NCAT test track. We've also done a little bit of work with earth pressure cells, but none of that has been published. Another study that you'll find that isn't actually listed in this presentation was presented by the University of Florida in their APT facility in the 2008 or 2009 TRB conference. Another area that people were asking to help with in terms of APT instrumentation was, what are the advantages and disadvantages of specific gauges? Is one gauge going to be more robust and have a better chance of surviving? What are the differences between thermistors and thermocouples in terms of measuring temperatures? So these challenges and advantages and disadvantages that APT facilities have determined needed to really be quantified and published so that other APT facilities could garner knowledge from what other organizations have been doing. Emphasis Area 8 was really on the relation between APT and theoretical models for pavement response and distress, especially as we push towards more mechanistic design and models such as the simplified viscoelastic continuum damage. People have been wondering, well, how do these models really play out in real life? And so they wanted to look at aspects of modeling that are really relevant to APTs, the full scale versus laboratory, and this would be things like E-star or simplified viscoelastic continuum damage. How does the fatigue characterization in the lab relate to actually what we see out in the field in terms of strain measurements, in terms of fatigue cracking, or what even our rutting models? Are what we're measuring in the lab appropriate to what we're actually measuring out in the field? And the final emphasis area in that was really to start trying to develop some APT experiments that really supported or disproved some of these advanced models to see if they were correct. Because if they weren't really supported by the field measurements, we needed to be moving towards newer models and developing new concepts that could help us really characterize what was happening on the pavement. So these 8 emphasis areas were then taken by the members of CAPT and really broken down into 2 really quantifiable goals that they wanted to achieve in the immediate future of CAPT. And the first goal was really develop procedures to quantify APT benefits. At this time, I'm not sure what work has been done on this goal. I believe the people at Kansas State would be able to be a little bit more informative on that. But I know specifically at the test track, we have really strived recently to develop cost-benefit ratios for for some of the work that we've completed over the last 10 to 12 years at the track. Goal number 2 for the CAPT group was really to develop an instrumentation how-to program. And this instrumentation how-to program will give us ideas on how do I install gauges, how do I select the right gauges and appropriate gauges for me to use at my facility, and even eventually down the road, maybe even looking at well, how do I process and collect these data? What's an appropriate waveform for my strain? What do I even call strain in that waveform? And so those were the 2 immediate goals that CAPT decided they wanted to try to tackle. So this leads us to the current work that CAPT has just started and just put under contract in a project really called Development of Instrumentation Resources for Accelerated Pavement Facilities. It was broken down into really 5 tasks. And the first task, which will hopefully begin in the next week or 2, is a survey of really APT facilities on instrumentation practices. And this will be similar to a survey that was conducted in 2007, 2008 for the APT facilities in the U.S. on what gauges are being used in asphalt and concrete and in the granular and subgrade materials, and what are the disadvantages and disadvantages of using these gauges. Have you seen failure? Are they robust? Not only this, in terms of APT facilities, we're going to try to contact some of the accelerated loading roads, such as the instrumented road in Oklahoma. I know Dr. David Tim is also working with a new road near Albuquerque, New Mexico, and really trying to see what gauges are being used there and what have been the positives and the negatives of using these different gauges. Once this survey is completed, we're going to create a database of what is actually being used in our facilities, and create a database on the current instrumentation practices. And the goal is to set this up similar to the HVSIA matrix, so that you might be able to go to a standalone CAPT website and see what is being used at NCAP, what's being used at Minroad or up in Indiana, and how are these gauges really relevant to what different facilities are measuring. The task 3 is going to be to take that database and really create a state-of-the-practice synthesis, and this will be, again, similar to what was done for the 2008 APT conference that was in Spain, and develop just a synthesis of what instrumentation is being used, and take all these findings and the results of the survey and put them into paper form so that we can distribute it among APT facilities to help us as we're moving forward with our projects and moving forward with new research. Develop more robust programs so that we're also collecting better, stronger data sets. One thing that will be interesting, yes?
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yes.
Slide number 9. I had a question on slide number 9.
Okay. I've moved it back.
Here on the Okay, yes. Here on the task where you say you are going to conduct a survey, is there any specific APT facilities that you'll be focusing on, or just a general survey?
Well, what we're going to actually try to do is they haven't discussed whether we're looking at APT facilities worldwide. In the past, we've conducted the APT facilities in just the United States. I'm going to look outside of just the CAPT members, but we're going to try to be as all-encompassing as we can. Obviously, if a facility doesn't respond, we can't use them in the survey, but we'll quantify that as well. So we're going to look outside of just CAPT members and try to get as many APT facilities as possible.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Richard, as long as we're at question mode at the moment,
Okay.
the survey about instrumentation practices, you're obviously asking about the gauges, but will you ask about end equipment too? What box, what data logger do you plug these gauges into, and because that, and how do you do it? Because we've struggled for a while. I think we finally figured it out, but you know, depending on you get this gauge from this manufacturer, and you get the data logger from a different manufacturer, and you have to make the two of them talk, and that can sometimes be a challenge.
We can. I think in the survey we can get a little bit into the data logger. I'm in the process of developing that survey right now.
Okay.
So that's something that I could add to the survey.
I think that would be
we'll,
useful.
we probably won't get into like data processing
Sure.
software and everything on this.
Yeah, that's fine.
But I can definitely add data acquisition and into the survey as well.
Yeah, basically just the hardware. So then if you put that list or that database together, even if there's not a lot of detail written about it, we can see, oh, this other group has this particular gauge hooked up to this end equipment, and maybe they've figured out how to make it work. We can call them.
Okay, I'll be happy to add that to it.
Okay.
The other thing too, Richard, is we've struggled with good practices related to how you just physically do these things, how to keep track of all different wires, different processes that ensure that you don't have your sensors mixed up on the trees, your data logger's collecting it correctly. There's
Right.
a lot of little things there that go wrong that cause lots of pain and sorrow later on in life.
Right.
So, it's hard to figure out how to really approach that or not, but it's something that we're real concerned with because we've come across areas where when you're installing a couple hundred sensors, things get crossed up.
Right, and I know we've developed a pretty good system at NCAT for that, but I can also talk to, that may not be something I specifically ask in a survey, but I may call some certain facilities and kind of gauge what they're doing. I might be able to gather more information from a telephone call than a survey on how to do things like keep track of wires, or what are the biggest kind of heartburns in terms of pavement instrumentation that we really need to address.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me make that note. All right, any other questions? All right, with task 4, we're actually going to develop a few YouTube-style instrumentation videos on gauge installation. We're actually we have the test track reconstruction, which will be happening this summer, where we'll be installing pressure plates, we'll be installing strain gauges, and temperature probes. And so we're actually going to take that time while we're going during reconstruction to shoot some videos on the way we're installing gauges. We're feeling pretty confident in the way that we do this system. As just an example of ways that some people install their gauges, so that they could go to the CAPT website, look at this is how it's done. They're going to be very short videos with Dr. David, Tim, and myself providing some commentary during gauge installation to explain what's being done. And then finally, we'll develop a best practices report in terms of gauge installation. This will also include some of those things that you were talking about recently. Well, how do I keep track of the wires to make sure I'm plugging the right thing into the right slot in the box? And other areas of interest for the APT facilities that I gather from the phone calls, so we can try to address those current problems. One thing that we just found out about, or officially got word that on the approval, was at the 4th International Conference on Accelerated Pavement Testing in Davis, California this year, on Tuesday, September 18th, we'll be actually conducting a pavement instrumentation workshop, and Dr. David Jones at UC Davis has just given me free reign of this workshop now. We're not exactly sure if it's going to be a half day or a 3/4 day. It is also going to be in conjunction with a workshop that Dr. Matos is going to be completing on an overview kind of APT facilities that morning. But some of the things that we're currently looking at in developing the program is, one, just give a general sense of the gauge overview, which is being used across the country and across the world. We're also hopefully going to be able to have a little bit of hands-on time at their APT facility, and maybe even install a couple of gauges to give people a chance to get down in the trenches and see how it's done. We talk about the process as it's being worked out. A few people have suggested, really, how do I use the data once I get it? What are some important and practical ways that things that I can do with strain or pressure data or even FWD data to really bring the results and the benefits of my APT facility to life. We're hoping to have some also breakout groups as a part of this instrumentation workout where we can sit down and discuss some of the instrumentation problems that we're working with, and maybe come away with this, from this workshop with a few resolutions on, well, this is really the way we think that things should work in terms of pavement instrumentation. Just have a good meeting of the minds together. And I was hoping to have a few minutes of discussion on what are some certain things that if you were able to attend this workshop would be important for you to bring away from the table. I'll just open this up to anybody at this time.
Y'all try to be polite now. We don't need to stumble all over ourselves trying to comment at the same time.
I was starting to think I'd gotten disconnected.
You're talking to yourself. Hey, one thing that we could do, I guess, in Minnesota is he's going to do the next month's webinar related to calibration of moisture gauges. You know, we should probably go back in the lab and videotape kind of what he's doing. That might be something you could add to the program, so we get a kind of a handle on if people think we're doing the correct thing or not. Might open people's eyes for that. I don't know if we could piece together some different things like that, because we're not necessarily going to be able to have our, quote, instrumentation guys there, Bob Stromans and Len Palick at the conference.
Right.
It's going to be figureheads like myself, Tim, and Tom.
Pretty faces.
Pretty faces.
The guys who actually do the work are stuck here doing the work.
But I think we want to gain from it is kind of to see what other people are doing. Have that, you know, like I said, if we have a list of, you know, here's the 10 steps to install a blah blah gauge, I think it's good to put that up on the wall and start taking pot shots at it. So, you know, NCAT can say, you know, I do this, and we say we do that. I think that would help us out a lot, because we kind of start getting the experience from other people by just having those processes, you know, very simply stated, so we can start learning from that. I mean, we do things, kind of some of the things we do just because we do.
Right.
I don't know if they're right or wrong. But that's where someone's got to put something on the wall and see if it sticks. And that's what I kind of see this workshop as.
Ben, I kind of think, I agree with what you just said. I kind of think that the two takeaways that I would like to have from a program like this is, like you said, number one, what types of sensors are being deployed by other programs for what purposes, and then the other big thing is with the gauges that I have, you know, kind of as a generic APT program, what are some tips that I can pick up from other agencies to improve the way my work progresses? And Richard, what I always think about is that nice little adjustment gizmo that we use for strain gauges when they go off scale to bring them back on scale.
Right.
I don't know how common that is. That might be that everybody might be already doing that, but just that type of stuff is really nice to know.
Oh, I think that's a perfect example, Buzz.
And you mentioned before, Richard, about the system that you guys kind of have in place for keeping track of which gauge is where, and how you plug the right gauge into the right slot in the data acquisition. So that can be part of it too.
Okay.
Well, and I don't know how much it relates to other people because we're so spread out, but we learned some, Richard, as you know, we learned some pretty hard lessons in Wi-Fi systems to get to work, to get to a point where we had enough stability to easily do what we want to do, and that was a tough road to travel, and stuff like that can be shared with other people is very useful.
Richard, are you looking at kind of like for that workshop to kind of say, let's now talk about moisture gauges, and here's kind of the current, kind of put up a current process, 10 steps to install a thermocouple, 10 steps to create a thermocouple tree, or what's your thought?
With the workshop right now, I'm fairly open. There are a few people that they're more interested. I think the challenge with this workshop is there are going to be people that are specifically looking about, like what y'all want, what gauges are being used and how do I use them the most efficiently, or how do I install them correctly, and let's talk about these basic things. There are other people that are very much more interested in the data that come out of these instruments. And my thought is if we don't get them in the ground right, the data that comes out of them doesn't matter.
Right. I agree.
And so we got to make sure, I'm more along y'all's lines of let's sit down, let's talk about here's how, or let's set up a list of, or a stepwise system of how do I install a strain gauge, and how do I make sure that it is going to actually be measuring the strain in the transverse direction. And then we sit, I may give 2 different facilities the way that they do that. And we showed the YouTube video that we've developed at NCAT, and here's how we've done it. And then we sit down and we talk about, well, what are the advantages, disadvantages? And if people are saying, well, this way may affect your measurements, we might be able to send, but here's actually some data that we've measured, or a study that we've done to show that that's not really the case. And just have some open conversation about maybe more gauge installation.
Richard, you're probably right about related to how to use the data. It's kind of funny, like we've taken moisture gauges and put them under our Pervious. And by the time you start wanting to look and analyze that data, it's pretty mind-boggling to try to wrap your arms around what all that means.
Right.
Well, and I shared
how you check the data if you need to. What's some reasonable ranges.
Right.
How would you use it?
If you're talking about if it's still open-ended and you make it a 3/4 day workshop, maybe you can spend half the day, or the morning doing the how-to, how you install it, and the nuts and bolts of getting it in the ground right and plugged in. Then you can do an hour or 2 in the afternoon, not the full thing, but do an example or 2 of this is one piece of data and how you use it and what it does. It'd be
I think that's
could cover both and attract both audiences there, but
I think that's a great idea. We just need to sit down and, on our part, and figure out exactly how long we're going to have to cover all this information, because that'll govern what we can do.
Yeah, right.
We could even have it where we set up where maybe in the morning we talk, like you said, we go through strain gauge installation and we talk about the calibration of moisture gauges. After lunch we go maybe and try to actually install a couple at their facility to get hands-on experience. Here's the issues that people are running into, and then after that talk about data collection and using that data.
Yeah, that works. My only problem with that would be John Harvey getting free labor out of us to help instrument his HBS facility, but otherwise that's fine.
We're not going to be installing any en route or under pavements.
Yeah, that's understood.
All the, like you said earlier, all the good help will be back at our shops doing work.
Yeah, right. It'll be us knuckleheads. Right. Okay.
But
I
that was about.
I always get hung up on moisture gauges. I'm going to be really interested in seeing y'all's presentation next month because we collected, I think it was 5 years of data in 2 different testing cycles down here before we determined that our numbers were not reliable. You know, I mean,
well,
and that was after.
You're ahead of us then, because we've been in business, what, 18 years or so, and I think we're just starting to kind of figure a thing or two out.
Well, I mean, and we, I mean, it's frustrating because, you know, you develop an elaborate site-specific. I mean, Richard, you know what we went through here, and then there's this unexplained drift in the measurements that is impossible to calibrate out, apparently, and it's just made me really cynical about moisture gauge. I mean, I want to make automated moisture measurements, electronic moisture measurements. I just hadn't figured out how to do it yet reliably, you know.
Yep. Well, hopefully we'll have a few hints along the way. I'm not going to lie and say that we have all the answers and have everything figured out, but I think we've made some progress over the last 6-12 months. So
that'll be great.
Well, that basically wraps up what I had in terms of a CAPT update. Are there any other questions or thoughts that y'all had, either about what we're doing at CAPT or the instrumentation workshop that we'll be having coming up?
So Ben kind of mentioned with the 5 tasks that you put up as part of the CAPT work. Is that all you doing all of those tasks, or are there other people involved doing that work?
I'm the PI on that work. I'm going to have a couple other graduate students helping me with some of the data analysis from the surveys, and I'll be using Dr. Tim on some of the gauge installation work. I was hoping he'd actually be able to come out to the workshop and help with that, but he's going to be teaching a course in Wisconsin at that time.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're looking for, right now I'm trying to nail down another person to come and help me work on that at the workshop.
Okay. So what happened to, is it Mostak from Kansas State? I thought he was going to be doing some of the work.
I think, and this is just the message that was relayed to me, was the last time CAPT got together, I think it was actually in Kansas.
Right. Yep.
They set out the goals that they wanted to do, and since I had worked in the past with CAPT as their staff engineer for a year,
yep.
and had done some of the instrumentation work,
yep.
They contacted me to see if I'd be willing to kind of take the ball and run with that, since I had a few things already developed for it.
Sure, that makes sense.
So I think it was more of an efficiency in trying to get things out in a timely manner. That they had asked me to come back and work with them as kind of a sub to Kansas State and finish this instrumentation task.
Okay.
And Andy is retired now. Is that correct?
He retired last Friday, I think.
Do we have any feel for what impact, if any, that's going to have on Kansas hosting the CAPT pool fund?
I don't have any indication. I guess I didn't. I mean, I had one email back from Andy saying, "See you later," and I said, good knowing you, and he said, yeah. So, you know, I guess I'm not quite sure the relationship now with the DOT, with Kansas State, and then, with Richard here. Richard, you're kind of seeing that they've kind of transferred it to you in a way, contracted through you, right?
For definitely for the instrumentation work, yes.
How about the website? Are you doing website stuff?
I am not doing the website. I think that they're talking. I got a random email from Ms. Doc the other day, that I was copied on, that he was emailing someone else, I think, about the website development.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I think they're doing that through in Kansas.
And so I think someone else from Kansas is doing the website, but they're going to be putting a lot of my data onto that website.
Okay. Well, it's too bad you're not on the phone right now.
Right.
Yeah.
And they knew that this was. I told Ms. Stark that this was happening, and I think Andy relayed the message to him, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's Brandon you can get a hold of too.
Right. And actually, I've talked to Brandon more than I've talked to Ms. Stark.
That makes more sense.
I think Brandon's on the notification list for these monthly meetings too, isn't he? You have to go back and check.
Brandon's from Kansas State University.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we'll have to poke him in the ribs when we see him next. I wanted to add one thing. I was on a TRB. Cheryl Richter has kind of a section meetings every once in a while for TRB, and it's kind of interesting that there was 2 other committees looking at instrumentation and interest in that. There was, I don't know if this means anything to anyone, but AFD20 and AFD80. The accelerated pavement testing is AFD40. So I'll be working with a couple people on that, kind of seeing what kind of synergy we could have with other groups related to that instrumentation. We had one for our committee called the Guide for Measuring the Response of Pavement Structures that was resubmitted research needs statements that I guess we'll share and see if we get any extra support through a couple of different committees. Cheryl kind of says having instrumentation stuff get funded is kind of tough.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'd imagine.
I guess we'll see.
One of those committees is John Stiekmeyer right here in the grading and basis community from MnDOT, if you guys know him. So he's pretty sharp, and we've been talking off the record a little bit here and there about that.
Yep.
Richard, how's your process going to work to develop the workshop, the details, to work out the details?
Well, my goal right now is I've got a pretty good list. David Jones sent me a few things that he was hoping that I'd be able to include. I've got a list of, I believe at the last CAPT meeting they kind of put down a list of a few things that they would like to see as well. And I've got the list of today. And so I just need to come up now, talk to Dave and figure out how long I can get in the time. And I know that I really do need to include kind of all 3 of those things, looking at putting the gauges into the ground and their reliability and calibration. I need to have a little bit of time in with the hands-on work, because they seem to be important for the CAPT members, and then also a little bit in actually using some of that data. So I'm going to just try to come up with a list. I may circulate it around a little bit for some ideas on the workshop, and I can include some of y'all in that process as I develop this itinerary or the program for the day.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Just to make sure it's focused in an area that's going to be, that we're actually going to come away from that workshop and think, this was worth our time. We can now go back and make our measurements and make our facilities better because of it.
Richard, what percent of time are you going to be working on this and the survey before the conference?
I'm not exactly sure how the percent of time works out. It's not a lot of time. Like I said, I've got a graduate student that's going to be doing most of the survey work for me.
Right.
And I'm hoping to have that survey out by the end of the month. But I want the survey to be complete and the synthesis to be completed by the workshop. So maybe we can kind of roll that out at the pavement instrumentation workshop and kind of give the general overview of pavement instrumentation, really be the results of that survey at the time.
Okay. That would be.
And I'm also hoping that the YouTube videos that we developed from the test track construction will be done by then. I've got one of our marketing our marketing expert at NCAT. She's on the contract as well, and she's going to be helping doing some of the videography and putting it all together and developing those videos.
Good. Good. Well, if there's anything that you need to run by us here in Minnesota, I'm sure Tim and Tom will help you out as much as they can.
Thanks, Ben.
Well, I appreciate the offer. I will probably be using y'all. And since I got free access to Buzz, he'll be definitely on the list as well.
Yeah. I'm kind of thinking the big 4 facilities that I can think of: Monroe, NCAT, UC Davis, and Illinois. I mean, I think the 4 of us would be major contributors here in the workshop and in the synthesis as a whole.
Right.
Not that I'm volunteering Ahmad for more. He's got plenty of time on his hands.
Right.
I think that's a pretty good
yeah, I also don't
assessment, Tim.
Yeah, I also don't want to be the only one speaking the whole day at the workshop, so I'm going to try to pull in a few other people that are going to be at the meeting anyway to maybe come in and be involved. So.
And you know, we've got some kind of different stuff that we're doing this time for this track. We're putting pressure plates. We're building pressure plates into a structure that we're going to do full depth reclamation on, and that's a different kind of thing, you know. So it's,
Yep. We've been doing some of that, and with mixed degrees of success. So I'd be very curious to see how you're going to actually do that.
You probably want to know how we did
it.
yeah. Do y'all have any papers that you've written, documentation for the work that you've done with FDR?
The papers are at the bottom of the file cabinet. That's our papers.
Yeah.
Well, do you mean the research into FDR or installing sensors into FDR?
Well, I mean, we would be interested in sensor selection, which would kind of touch on research, but then also installation methods.
Okay.
Like one of the things that we're, you know, kind of struggling with is we want to be as close as possible to the limit, the depth limit of the FDR, but you know, obviously you don't want to ever touch it because then you just killed your gauge when you do. So.
Yeah. Well, take whatever depth you think the reclaimer is going to go, and then add a couple inches, because we did exactly that in 2008. We had pressure plates, and they were buried 2 inches into the clay subgrade, and we were assured all the way up and down and back and forth that the reclaimer was not going to get into the clay. And then, as you know, I'm standing behind watching the thing, there's kind of white clouds coming up on the outside, and pretty soon, oop, there's one of our pressure plates in a tangled mess coming up behind the drum. So we haven't exactly been successful.
Well, that
had better luck a few other times.
That confirms our tentative plan, because we had decided to go 6 inches below the interface
That's a good plan.
because we wanted to be a few inches outside of where it's not supposed to go, but it probably will go. So.
Right. That's a good plan. But yeah, I'd be interested in seeing, you know, a little more detail on how you guys are doing that.
We've done some weird stuff. I mean, the FDR, we did our 2-lift concrete last couple years ago, which was a challenge when the paver's coming, you know, 15 minutes after the first paver, trying to do that next lift. You know, at the FDR, we tended to remove material and then put in strain gauges and things like that, then recompact that.
Yeah, we've learned to let the contractor do their work and get done, and then we go back in and retrofit, try and match the materials as best we can. But you know, that's a challenge too.
Right. Well, Richard, we appreciate your time and appreciate everybody participating. This is always a good learning experience for us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yep. Likewise.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Y'all take care.
Take care.